Hi, SpongicX here. In a previous video, I shared my ideas for a mature-rated Mario Party clone starring characters from Conker's Bad Fur Day. I didn't have a name for that series just yet, but I decided to call this series SpongicX Sparks, where I share ideas for video games I'd love to see happen someday, and I hope that others would love to see these ideas come to life someday as well. Technically, this is actually the third episode, because I never realized it, but I actually made an episode like this years ago about my ideas for a future Super Smash Bros. Game. One after Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. So yeah, this is technically episode 3 of SpongicX Sparks. But anyways, in this episode, I've decided to discuss ideas for potential remakes for both Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. Many gamers who grew up with an N64 or were introduced to the series with the Xbox 360's Xbox Live Arcade know how great of a series the Banjo games were, with its addictive and fun gameplay, wacky characters, humor, colorful worlds, and so much more. To this day, many are still begging for a proper sequel to Banjo-Tooie, one that doesn't try changing the formula of the game or forcing Banjo-Kazooie to drive vehicles throughout. A lot of people want remakes akin to the likes of the Crash N. Sane trilogy or Spyro Reignited trilogy. One popular opinion many seem to have over remakes is that they want them to be as faithful to the originals as possible, as they want to mimic the feel and movement of the original games. And personally, I hate the idea of remakes being completely spot on. I'd be lying if I didn't admit that I wish that Crash and Spyro remakes didn't tweak their controls or difficulty a bit, because I felt like especially with Spyro, how it felt like the movement was limited to mimic only D-pad controls instead of actual analog controls, and I would have preferred the game be recalibrated to feel like it's more meant for control stick instead of D-pads. It felt like the movement should have been a lot smoother and looser. Same with SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. I would have loved it if they added more levels or abilities to enhance and extend the gameplay. So, remakes of games I love conceptually more are games like Conker Live and Reloaded and Super Mario 64 DS. Live and Reloaded may be a mixed bag of a remake, though, with its heavier censorship, questionable combat, and lackluster facial expressions. But aside from that, it really tweaked the game by giving us a better camera, much superior first-person shooting, aiming, and controls, and it shortened and loosened up a lot of the long and repetitive gameplay moments, like the annoying part with the bowl, and some of the annoying hurdles in the war chapter. A lot of the stuff that they removed from the game were things that I honestly could live without, except for the multiplayer mode. They really should have remade that. Super Mario 64 DS is a better example of remakes I'd love to see more of, where it practically includes near everything from the original game, but it rewrites the story to have more additions, including 3 additional playable characters with unique abilities, more power-ups, more stars to collect, more levels, more boss fights, and unlockable minigames. I'd also love to see a Donkey Kong 64 remake that does this, except it gets rid of all the pesky minigames and removes the requirements of needing to have both the Nintendo coin and rare coin to get to the final level. Or final battle, I mean. So, the only downside, aside from the DS's terrible screen resolution, was the lack of analog controls for Mario 64 DS. Even playing Mario 64 DS on a 3DS or the Wii U's virtual console, it just felt off. Even with a joystick, it just still felt off. It needed proper analog calibration. So, yeah, to this day, I'd still love to see a remake of Mario 64 DS for Switch or its successor. However, I wouldn't want a remake to be like Final Fantasy VII remakes, where it improves upon the visuals, but not only stretches and divides the story across multiple games you gotta buy, making it way too expensive, but it also drastically alters the gameplay and even the story. Even with changes and additions, I still want the Banjo remakes to offer most of what the first 2 games presented us with to begin with. If they ever remade Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, I wouldn't want them to just be simple remakes with redone graphics and music. I'd want them to not only enhance and extend the game, but I'd want it to combine the games. Maybe call the game Banjo-KaTooie. I know I'm not the only one who loved Banjo-Tooie and tried so hard as a kid to revisit the first game's worlds, not realizing how video game limitations worked. But dang, that game really fooled you into thinking you really were in the same world as the first game. Usually when you play a sequel to a video game, when they have returning levels, like in the Kingdom Hearts series, they always rehaul the level's layout or design so it doesn't feel quite as familiar as it first was, with examples like Halloween Town or Agrabah. And so Banjo-Tooie, it really fools you into thinking you still are in the first game, but it does such a great job at enhancing the movesets that it makes you wish you could go back to these old levels with your new arsenal of abilities. However, of course, many younger gamers were still too young and naive to realize that the worlds from the first game are impossible to revisit, due to them not being programmed into the game to begin with. I still couldn't help but dream of a way to revisit the first game's worlds with all these new abilities learned from Tooie. Well, that's why I think a remake should not only let us relive these games with more added to it, but it should reward players who beat both games with the ability to cross both save files over into a new post-game mode that mixes the games together, allowing us to freely travel between the worlds of Grunty's Lair and the Isle of Hags. The main menu of the game would be like a hybrid of the main menus of both the N64 Banjo games, taking place in Banjo's house. There will be 3 menus to start off with. So the left side of the house would be like Banjo's bed, and that would be the entrance to a menu for the Banjo-Kazooie remake. In the center would be the one for Banjo-Tooie, and then over to the right would be kind of locked off for the moment until you beat both Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie. But then further to the right would be basically the replay mode from Banjo-Tooie, but it will be updated to also include cutscenes, boss fights, and minigames that were only available in the first game. Yeah, that was one thing that always bugged me about the first game. It did not have any way to replay some iconic moments without having to start a new game. So for those who want to revisit Grunty's Furnace Fun without having to start the whole game over, they can replay it as much as they want. Maybe even add some multiplayer support to some of these modes. Like Grunty's Furnace Fun would make for a fun little multiplayer board game trivia mode. Remember the challenge in Bubble Gloop Swamp against Mr. Vile where you had to eat all the little, whatever they were called. That would be a fun little multiplayer mode where you control alligators or crocodiles and you have to eat up the little things. And so, yeah, I think it would be cool to see them try to reimagine some areas or moments from Banjo-Kazooie into little mini-games that could be used in multiplayer mode, just like Banjo-Tooie. Maybe they could even take more levels from the first game and turn them into some more first-person shooter modes. Because the first-person shooter mode was one of the more popular minigames from Banjo-Tooie, after all. I also think they should add tweaks and settings to the boss fight modes that allow us to not only change the amount of health we start out with, so either you can add more health or you can even limit it to see if you can beat the boss without getting hit, or even allow us to use the cheats we've unlocked from Cheeto to help enhance the fights. Because, yeah, I always loved how in Banjo-Tooie, if you got, the cheat codes throughout the game, it was fun to go to a boss fight and see how overpowered you felt, and I always wish you could have done that with some of the earlier bosses, but it really wasn't possible since a lot of these cheats are ones you can't get until much later in the game. So, I always thought it would have been fun if the boss replay mode had tweaks, so you could edit, if you want the cheat codes activated or not. After beating the first 2 games, a third game option appears called Banjo-Kazooie. But I'll get more on that later. For now, let's start off with what I'd love to see in a Banjo-Kazooie remake. Graphic-wise, I'd love for its graphics to be similar in the style of Conquer Live Reloaded, but more colorful and still maintaining the cartoony appearance, because, yeah, some of the characters in Conquer Live Reload, they got rid of the big cartoony eyeballs and tried to make them look more realistic, and it really looked odd on some characters. So I want Banjo-Kazooie to still keep the big googly eyes, but obviously add more texture and detail to it to make it look a little more hyper-realistic, but not too realistic. I want to see Banjo with an actual fur render, and Kazooie with fluffy-looking feather renders. I want the grassy areas to have lush rendered blades of grass. I want the water to be shimmery, ripply, and reflective, and so on. I don't want the game to look fake and artificial like the world's nuts and bolts, and a lot of people say they want Toys for Bob to remake the Banjo games, and I'm not sure about that. I mean, I loved what they did with the Spyro remakes, mostly for the levels. As for the characters, though, I thought the characters looked too plastic and fake looking. I personally would have loved to have seen Spyro looking a little more detailed and scaly. I would have loved to have seen, Elora look actually furry or something. It's I just felt like the characters looked too plastic. They looked like toys instead of actual remade characters. And like I said, I'd like it to kind of resemble the graphics more of Conquer Live Reloaded, because that game was really ahead of its time with its graphics. I want most of the moveset and controls to feel the same, but here is where I'd make some tweaks. I'd revise Banjo's moveset to play more like Banjo-Tooie's. In the first game, Banjo's roll attack had no control to it, as it forced Banjo to lunge forward with a little bit of a recovery time. In Tooie, Kazooie also lunged out of the backpack, and the players were able to steer Banjo's direction as he rolled. So yeah, I'd like the first Banjo-Kazooie remake to actually replace the original roll with the more advanced roll from Tooie, because that was just more fun to use. In the original Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo's default attack was him scratching with his claws. It also forced him to lunge forward a bit, and it had a bit of a delayed recovery. In Tooie, his scratch was replaced with Kazooie pecking 3 times, but she barely lunges forward as using it. So I think one thing that would be really cool is if in the remake, they combine the 2 attacks. Have Banjo lunge forward while scratching as Kazooie joins in to peck out enemies at the same time. I think that would be a nice compromise. I'd maybe also speed up Banjo and Kazooie's backflip ability. I always thought it was a little too slow in the original games. I would kind of speed it up just a little bit. The egg shooting mechanic needs a major overhaul. Admittedly, it is hard going back to the primitive egg shooting mechanics in Banjo-Kazooie after seeing how far video games have come since the PS2 era, ever since the inclusion of double analog controls. The original game had us hold the Z button while pressing the N64's up C button to shoot the eggs forward, or C down to shoot them backwards. And obviously, because modern controllers don't have C buttons, instead they have a right analog stick, it didn't feel right to have to tilt upwards or downwards to shoot out eggs, especially when it's easy to accidentally have your thumb slip and accidentally turn the right or left camera buttons instead, since they are right there on the right analog stick. It's easy to accidentally slip into that instead. And so I think they should revise the egg shooting mechanics similar to the shooting controls in Conquer Live and Reloaded. The Xbox 360 ports of the Banjo games left a lot of extra buttons that the controller had to offer, and they left them to be useless, unfortunately. I felt like it would have been cool to revamp a lot of abilities to use these extra buttons. I liked some of the changes they did. I liked how, for the Talon Trot, you had to hold both the LT and RT buttons, but I didn't like how both the LT and RT buttons were used as both a crouch button. I felt like they should have just had the right trigger be the crouch button and then save the L trigger for something else. Maybe the L trigger could have been used to activate the gold feathers or something, I don't know. And so I'd love to see the remake actually benefit from using these extra buttons. In my proposal for this, I think holding the RT button and then pressing the Y button while the R trigger is pulled down should have Banjo pull Kazooie out like a gun, similar to in Banjo-Tooie. Except instead of being in a first-person mode by default, you're now in a third-person shooter perspective, similar to the Ratchet and Clank series. So when Banjo has Kazooie equipped as a gun, he can now sidestep, jump, and you'll have a crosshair that you can aim with the right stick to aim with, and you press the R trigger to shoot when in this mode, and then to cancel out of it, you just press the B button to go back to regular platformer mode. You can even press the RS button while you're in this mode to trigger the first-person shooter mode, just like in Banjo-Tooie. And then you can press the LS button to show a rear-view camera, so Kazooie can still be able to poop out eggs, which is a necessary ability for solving certain puzzles throughout the games. So, yeah, I'd love to see this change. It would be really cool to see a reimagined Final Battle of Gruntilda with these revised shooting controls. It would definitely be a lot easier, but still a bit challenging because you'd have to remember to cancel out of it when she shoots out her powerful spell that can only be blocked off with the gold feathers, unless they can find a way to have the gold feathers be activated when you're in the shooter mode, of course. So, as for changes for the collectibles, like blue eggs, red feathers, and gold feathers, I noticed how in the original, once these items were collected, they wouldn't respawn until the level was exited from, and you revisit the level and then they'll respawn. So, in the remake, I think the items should respawn over time, kind of like how they did in Banjo-Tooie. So, Banjo-Kazooie's exploration was pretty time-consuming at times, with very limited forms of transportation. I mean, Tooie may have been a big game that required a lot of backtracking, but at least it kept that in mind and introduced a lot of traveling conveniences, like the warp silos and warp pads. So I think the Banjo-Kazooie remake should add the silos and warp pads across the hub world and in-game worlds. For instance, in Spiral Mountain, add a warp pad in front of Banjo's house and one on top of Spiral Mountain, so it's easier and quicker to get from the top to bottom. The original game did have the warp cauldrons that could warp you to different rooms, but honestly, they felt very useless since it only felt like it just took you up one floor or something. So I'd just get rid of them and replace them with the warp silos from Banjo-Tooie, and add more of them throughout the multiple rooms for quicker and more convenient travel. Also, I think in the pause menu, they should add a warp to level option, to help quick travel between levels and make that a lot easier. So obviously some levels would likely have to have strict limitations for the warp pads. For instance, Click Clock Wood would likely have to require its own warp pads for each season section. since the level has all these different variants of the level that are split up based on the 4 seasons of life. And so, yeah, otherwise players would be cheating throughout the progression if the warp pads could take you through any season. So, I think like once you step through one season door of, so like if you step through the spring version of Click Clock Wood, the warp pads will only work for the spring version of that level. Same with the summer one. You'd have to reactivate all the warp pads that only work for the summer version, etc. Also, once a Banjo-Tooie is unlocked, I think it's safe to say that all the warp silos that lead to the previous Grunty's lair levels will have to be disabled, and they won't be usable again until KaTooie mode is unlocked. But they will have to be reactivated to have the worlds of Kazooie and Tooie interchangeable again. I'd want the game to get rid of the life system like Banjo-Tooie did, but I don't think they necessarily need to get rid of the 1-up trophies. Instead, they could make a meta joke upon collecting it the first time, where it states how it used to give you a 1-up, but due to changing tastes of video games, their purpose is obsolete. But they try to offer to make it up to you by saying they'll fully restore your health bar, or maybe they could add a temporary extra honeycomb to your health bar, which disappears upon getting hurt. There's no doubt that most fans agree that the transformations in Banjo-Tooie are superior over the ones in the very first game. Not only is there one in every level, but most of them come with ways to defend themselves, unlike the first game where only the crocodile got to attack. Too bad he was stuck in one of the least popular levels of the game. I mean, he was one of the better transformations in the game, but he was stuck in such a pretty forgettable level. So I would like to add tweaks to the transformations and even add a new transformation to levels that didn't have them before. But more on that when I talk about KaTooie mode. For instance, for the termite and walrus transformation, maybe they could have a headbutt attack, or for the pumpkin, he could have a tumble attack, or have him spit seeds out or something. For the bee, just give him the projectile stinger attack from Banjo-Tooie. In the original game, there were 100 music notes hidden in each level, and their locations were reset upon dying or exiting the level, and it only keeps record of your highest note score. Like, this got pretty frustrating, especially when it came to trying to get them all on a level like Rusty Bucket Bay, but the Xbox 360 ports made the note collecting permanent, and they didn't require us to collect them all in one run anymore. Same with the Jinjos. So some players like me actually like this change, while some complained that it took away from the challenge of the original. I think there could be a cool compromise for this in the Banjo-Kazooie mode. So the regular remake of Banjo-Kazooie can keep the permanent note collection, but upon collecting all 100 notes in a level, a new character will appear near the entrance of each level once you get the KaTooie mode unlocked. Let's just say we'll be greeted with a donkey jack-in-the-box named Jack Ashton. Yeah, I know what I said. So this jackass-in-a-box will congratulate us for finding all the music notes in the level, and he'll offer us a new challenge. He claims that he has all the notes of that world inside of his box, and he wants you to wind up his music box until he pops out and spreads the notes across the level, back to their original spots. He'll then challenge us to collect all the notes in one run without dying or leaving the level. If we succeed, he'll give us an alternate costume or skin to wear. During Jack's challenges, he'll also run a timer to say how long it took us to complete the event, which players can share their scores online to see who beat them the fastest. I think this would be a fair compromise, and it would allow players who hated having to collect all the notes in one run to not have to do it again, but then for those who do want that challenge, they can go back to it and get rewarded for it. I think swimming controls could be revised to be a little bit faster and easier to steer. Maybe they could have the right analog stick be used to rotate Banjo's directions. I think the beak bomb attack should be revised to have a target lock-on and homing option to make it easier for Banjo and Kazooie to destroy those pesky snowmen and freeze Easy Peak and Quick Clock Wood. As for the shoe abilities, like the Turbo Trainers or the Wading Boots, I think they should no longer have a time limit and even let the players pull them out at will instead of having to collect them to use them. So maybe holding the L button could open up a little item menu and we can aim with the right stick to toggle on and off between the boots or shoes. So some might think it will make the game too easy, but not really, because I mean, there's still the challenges where you have to activate the switches and race towards them before the timer goes out, and so I never saw the point in having to time limit your shoes or boots when there's already a time limit on top of that. It just felt unnecessary. Also, I'd also extend the time limits for a lot of those Switch challenges, because I've always felt like they were prematurely set in Banjo-Kazooie, because even before the timer goes out, sometimes the door would shut anyways, and I don't know. So I would definitely extend the timers for those kind of race events, because most of them just felt very off. It felt like it took dumb luck instead of skill to actually win those. So yeah, they were definitely faulty and need a lot of patching. As for Brentilda's tips about Grunty, which are needed for Grunty's quiz show towards the end, I'd add a pause menu option that allows us to study over the tips we've collected from Brentilda across the game. So that way you don't have to write it down physically or take screenshots like in the Switch version or something, I think it would be easier to just have a pause menu option that collects all the ones we've collected. I mean, there is also the easier option of just eliminating it entirely, but I think they should still keep them in. As for Cheeto's cheat codes, along with the cheat code castle inside of Treasure Trove Cove, I would also add a cheat menu in the pause menu that saves the cheats we've activated so we no longer have to keep retyping them in to reuse them, along with allowing us to enable and disable the cheats in case like we want to shut them off later or reactivate them. Similar to the cheat list in Mayhem Temple from Banjo-Tooie, except now we get to activate the cheat list anywhere. Same with Bottles' secret codes from Bottles' secret portrait challenge in Banjo's house. Instead of having to restart the challenges every time we restart the game to regain the codes and all that, now we can have the cheats saved and activated on a cheat menu. The cheats we get can even be carried over to Banjo-Tooie's remake, so because Banjo-Tooie had a lot of the same cheat codes as Banjo-Kazooie. I don't see the need to have both games have separate cheat codes. I think it would be fun to be able to carry over the cheat codes from Banjo-Kazooie over to Tooie, in addition with all the exclusive cheat codes that Banjo-Tooie gained. Also, I think the health upgrades we get in Banjo-Kazooie should be carried over to Banjo-Tooie as well. As for Stop and Swap, I'm not quite sure. I mean, it could go one of two ways. Either have the Stop and Swap items be inaccessible until both Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie are beaten, and we get to unlock KaTooie mode, then all of a sudden the Stop and Swap items would be available. Or they could do it just like they did at the Xbox 360 version and have it where they're only available if we have save data of Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts present. So as for Stop and Swap 2, that was teased in the Xbox 360 version of Banjo-Tooie, I feel like they should find a way to implement those as well. And it's sad how we'll likely never know the real purpose that Stop and Swap was really meant to do. I mean, we got samples of what it was supposed to do in Banjo-Tooie because, like Jinjo as a playable character in multiplayer mode, and then, of course, the grand prize was getting Dragon Kazooie playable. And so those were really cool, but we never got to learn what the other ones really would have done. Rare tried acting like the Xbox 360 version of Tooie would give us the answer, but it was another tease as usual from them, because I doubt the N64 version of Banjo-Tooie intended to give us gamer icon pictures or a defunct Xbox 360 gamer theme as a reward. It makes no sense. You couldn't unlock this stuff in a, Xbox didn't even exist when the N64 was first made, and it just makes no sense. So even then, you could tell this is not what Stop and Swap was supposed to unlock in the original game. So what did they really have in mind? And they always tease us with it. It comes to a point where people are starting to realize, I don't think there ever was a plan for Stop and Swap. They just wanted to tease us. It's very typical of Rare. They love messing with their audience and keep them guessing. So I always love theorizing what Stop and Swap really could have unlocked. I'd like to imagine we could have gotten different colored variants for Dragon Kazooie. So the default Dragon Kazooie, the green dragon, allowed her to breathe fire and shoot unlimited fire eggs. So what if the other Stop and Swap eggs gave Dragon Kazooie different powers to change her element? So imagine having a sky blue dragon that breathes ice and shoots unlimited ice eggs, or a mechanical dragon that shoots unlimited grenade eggs, a golden dragon that shoots unlimited rapid fire eggs that were only available in the first-person shooter modes. So I also love the theory from an Easter egg in Grabbed by the Ghoulie that all the items could unlock a secret level. Many gamers, including me, tried getting through the two doors inside of Grunty's lab towards the top of Grunty's tower in the first Banjo game. We wondered if Stop and Swap held the answers to getting past those doors to see what's really inside. Sadly, we never got an answer, but these remakes could finally give us an answer we hoped for. As for some level tweaks, I don't have a lot of notes to mention, but Bubble Gloop Swamp definitely needs some tweaks. The maze needed to get to Mumbo's hut always was a pain to get through, due to how long it takes each time to get through the maze, and you have to constantly put on the wading boots to get there before the time limit runs out, and it was nice that there was a little shortcut, small enough for the little crocodile transformation to crawl under to get back to Mumbo's hut faster, but there was no way around for Banjo to get back there quicker. So once you turn back to regular Banjo, you're forced to go all the way back by taking the maze route again, and that was always so annoying. So that's where the warp pads for Banjo-Tooie would come in handy here. They could have one at the entrance of Mumbo's hut, and then have the others be elsewhere, so Banjo has a faster way of getting around this level. That, or they could have it where Banjo can activate a switch that opens up a little door to help him get out of Mumbo's hut's entrance a lot faster, so that way you don't have to take the maze route anymore. So, yeah, there's many ways around that annoying pestering moment in Bubblegloop Swamp. Also, for the Tip Top Choir mission, I'd get rid of the unnecessary punishment of hurting Banjo if he hits a wrong note. I mean, being forced to restart that whole section was annoying enough, so I don't really think hurting Banjo for getting a wrong note is necessary. Just being forced to start over is bad enough. So, in Mad Monster Mansion, during the challenge where you have to slide around on the glass to spell out Banjo-Kazooie, I'd change the camera view to be more of a zoomed out overhead view to make it easier to see the locations of the letters. As I always thought the camera angle on there was really weird. Same with the Cheat Code Castle and Treasure Trove Cove. I just think it would make it a lot easier if it wasn't such a diagonal view every time. So upon beating the game, not only will the remake of Tooie be unlocked, but we can get an option for a New Game Plus mode for Banjo-Kazooie, allowing players to restart the game while still maintaining all the moves we learned along with all our health upgrades and even the cheat codes we have activated. So this can allow players to replay the game at a faster pace like never before, without having to go through all the annoying pit stops to relearn everything we already know. So just a faster way to get all the notes and jiggies again. I think this would really be cool. And the same could be done with Banjo-Tooie, having a New Game Plus mode after you beat that. And yeah, I think it would really be cool with that game, especially due to all the backtracking in that game. So I forgot to mention, there's another tweak I wanted for one of the previous levels. In Rusty Bucket Bay, I'd make it a lot easier to reach the Grunty switch on top of that tall metal platform. It was always a pain to get through, since it barely gives you enough distance to jump and flutter towards it. So I would widen the platforms to make it less of a headache to reach. Otherwise, those are all the tweaks I have in mind for a Banjo-Kazooie remake. Now on to the sequel, Banjo-Tooie. So a little change I'd start off with to begin with is to actually include Tootie and have her have a minor role in the game instead of acting like she never existed. I always found it odd how after Bottles died, we were already hearing Jam Jars acting as our tutorial guide, despite how we haven't even met him yet until the first level. So I think the tutorial role for Spiral Mountain should be given to Tootie. They could alter the opening cutscene to have it where Tootie is sitting in a chair in the background, wishing she could join the boys in playing poker, only for Kazooie to tell her that she's too young to play it. And so, when Grunty returns and starts attacking, we could see Tootie evacuating with the others. As Banjo-Kazooie decide to adventure off to save the world, Tootie decides to stay behind and try fixing up the damage done in Spiral Mountain. Meanwhile, she'll try passing down the wisdom that Bottles passed on to her by leaving reminders for Banjo-Kazooie about their previous moves that they learned. So another story addition I'd add is during the cutscene where Banjo-Kazooie restore Bottles and King Jingling, I'd also have it where they manage to restore the Grey Jinjo family. There might be some players who never noticed this, but yeah, in Banjo-Tooie, when you go to Jinjo Village, you'll see like all this gray rubble. If you read the sign next to it, Jam Jars mentioned how this was the site of the Grey Jinjos, who were tragically run over by the Hag 1 drill. So yeah, that's pretty dark. Yeah, Grunty and her sisters managed to kill a whole family of Jinjos, and we never got to see the Grey Jinjos. And so I always thought it would have been nice if, for the remake, they actually have it where they manage to bring back the Grey Jinjos. And also, the Grey Jinjos could play a larger role once we unlock KaTooie mode. Have you ever heard of the scrap feature from Banjo-Tooie called Double Bottles mode? There was supposed to be a point where we could revisit Bottles' corpse. The angel that was originally floating above his corpse would suddenly be missing and be replaced with a Devil Bottles. So the Devil Bottles would decide to mess with Banjo-Kazooie, and he possesses any enemy or boss to let a second player with a controller take control of that enemy or boss and mess around with player one. It sounded like a fun but chaotic and hilarious mode. Too bad it was incomplete and never finished. It's partially playable in the form of a GameShark code, but it's pretty unstable from what I've heard. It can cause the game to crash a lot. So the Xbox 360 port even teased at the thought of bringing back that feature. Sadly, upon release, it was nowhere to be found and was once again silently scrapped. A remake would make for a perfect opportunity to bring the scrap feature back, but I would save the feature more for Banjo-Kazooie. As fun as the feature sounds, it just wouldn't make sense in Banjo-Tooie, because there comes a point in the game where we bring Bottles back to life, and playing that Devil Bottles would disappear. And so, I don't know, I just think that sounds like a shame, getting rid of a mode just because you got far enough into the game. It was already bad enough when they sealed off the entrance to Bottles' house once you make it to the final level. And no one likes that in a game, where you make it so far enough that a previous area is inaccessible. They should always give players an option to revisit an area without having to start the whole game over. Maybe devil bottles could be introduced without the need of coming from Bottles' corpse. So the main villains for my concept for this extra mode would be Grunty's sisters, as they're revealed to still be alive and they want revenge on Grunty for trying to kill them in a game show. So in the process of their revenge scheme, Manjola creates a spell to create devil bottles, who she sends to haunt Banjo-Kazooie. Part of the sisters' revenge scheme is to keep Grunty's severed skull head trapped in a jar inside of her old lair. As her sisters take over, the sisters decide the ultimate revenge would be to take credit in taking out Grunty's arch enemies, Banjo and Kazooie. Being fueled by her sister's betrayal, Grunty will resort back to rhyming because she knows it annoys her sisters. So, many players complain that Banjo-Tooie was too big of a game and that they got lost so many times throughout. So, this remake could offer a map system with some radars to help show the layout of the maps, along with icons and hints on where to find certain jiggies, NPCs, and other collectible items. Maybe they could also bring Brentilda back and hide her throughout these worlds, so she can give new players hints on how to get some of the trickier jiggies. The map system would really come in handy, especially in the first-person shooting sections of the game, like the one in Glitter Gulch Mine and Grunty Industries. One thing I loved about Banjo-Tooie was the introduction of the different eggs Kazooie could shoot and lay out. However, it does feel outdated compared to video games since the PS2 era. The first-person aiming controls with the C button inputs did not give enough range of control. Toggling between the eggs with the R button was tedious, and the way to collect more eggs was very frustrating. So instead of laying out different colored eggs for us to collect, they all shared an alternate egg that kept changing colors, and you only got to collect a specified egg depending on the color that the egg was when you ran into it. So I would replace the egg nest with egg cartons that resemble ammo cartons. So collecting the cartons replenishes a certain number of eggs for each kind. For instance, collecting 1 carton of eggs will replenish 5 blue eggs, 4 fire eggs, 3 ice eggs, 2 grenade eggs, and 1 Clockwork Kazooie egg. I feel like this could make the need of recollecting eggs less frustrating. Same could be said with the feather nest. So just collecting a feather nest will offer you 3 red feathers and 1 gold feather each time. I'd get rid of the additional honeycombs that they added into the game because they were absolutely annoying and screwed up my HP bar more than it helped. When I say additional honeycombs, I don't mean like the extra honeycombs you get for the honeycomb pieces. I'm talking about like the actual collectible health bars. Like sometimes when you defeat an enemy, they'll drop like one that has a question mark or an exclamation mark on it, and they activate like a little slot machine roulette that can either enhance your health bar or screw your health bar. So yeah, I'd get rid of it entirely because it always felt like it depended on dumb luck, and it was just really tiring to have to go through every time. So instead, I'd replace them with the 1-up Banjo trophies and have them just replenish your health entirely instead. One of the most popular features in Banjo-Tooie, and one of the most heavily advertised features in that game, was the ability to split Banjo-Kazooie apart so they can get more teamwork done by splitting up. This was a neat feature, but many hated its limitations, like how it could only be activated on a split pad. I'd add the option to be able to split up anywhere in the game by holding the RT button and pressing B button. So, we'll split up. Pressing the same buttons again can allow us to swap back and forth between Banjo or Kazooie. Maybe they could even add a split-screen co-op feature for 2 players if a second controller is connected. And so that would be a really cool idea, actually, not only for splitting up, but even for a co-op challenge for both Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, where player 1 controls Banjo's movements while player 2 controls Kazooie's actions. So it would be a tricky but fun challenge, as one player is responsible for running around as Banjo, jumping as Banjo, crouching as Banjo, while the other player has to time things right with Kazooie's actions and flutter abilities. As for Mumbo's spell sections, I'd give players the option to skip the cutscenes because they're really old and repetitive, especially if you've already played the game multiple times. So I'd update Mumbo to have more abilities when he's playable. So I'd give him higher jumps and the ability to grab on the ledges, and maybe give him a projectile attack where he can cast spells to attack enemies from a distance, complete with the option of activating a third-person shooter control mode. So I can imagine developers would be forced to change Humba Wumba a bit to avoid controversy and try not to offend people of Native American heritage. So I'd want them to keep her original design and update it to look more graphically appealing, but I'd maybe change her sound clips to sound less stereotypical. So instead of making a bunch of stereotypical Indian noises, just give her a normal voice. I'd keep her wigwam and theme music, but I would reorchestrate it to sound less stereotypical, get rid of like the stereotypical Indian battle cries in the background. Otherwise, I want them to still keep the tune of it, though. So yeah, I don't think it's necessary to entirely change her character. She's not based on any existing Indian tribe as far as I know. She's just a fictional tribe member in a silly video game, for crying out loud. So if Super Smash Bros. Wasn't afraid to alter Mumbo's appearance, I mean, they still allowed him to wear feathers on top of his skull. So I don't see the need to have to remove the feather on top of Humba's headband. I don't see any need to change her drastically. Just tone it down a little bit, if anything. Just remove some of the stereotypes, but I still want them to keep her as a Native American. Just make it, try to be a little more considerate, is the best way to put it. As for Humba's transformations, I'd mostly keep them the same as they were before, but there are a few changes I'd like. So, Detonator Banjo is one of the least popular transformations in that game because he would always hurt himself with his explosive attacks, and so I would maybe give him a little headbutt attack so players don't always have to rely on using explosions to attack enemies, or they don't always have to rely on trying to evade enemies. So, yeah, still keep the explosion that hurts yourself, but also have another option so you don't have to rely on hurting yourself every time. I'd give the washing machine transformation optional third-person shooting controls of aiming and strafing. Same with the bee transformation. So, I think one transformation that needs the most work, though, is the snowball transformation. It had a major game-killing glitch if you had the honeycomb back cheat unlocked and activated. So, the honeycomb back cheat allows players to slowly regain health over time when not getting hit. And that's a major problem for the snowball. For the snowball starts off small with barely any health. But as you gain more health by either collecting honeycombs or rolling around in the snow long enough, the snowball starts growing in size. There are certain areas that you can't get through if the snowball is too big, and it requires hurting yourself to shrink. However, the honeycomb back cheat makes it impossible to maintain a balanced size to squeeze through the smaller spaces, since the health regeneration will kick in, causing the snowball to grow again over time, making many areas impossible to reach in time without growing in size. And so I'd replace the snowball size from being determined by health, and instead have it lie entirely on just rolling around in the snow. Maybe they could even have a little gauge to let you know like how much snow you're gathering until it levels up again. I don't know, but I'd also stretch out Wumba's Wigwam to be fully compatible with any snowball size, whether big or small, so we don't have to rely entirely on Banjo hurting himself to shrink small enough so he can go back into the Wigwam. Speaking of which, a shortcut to wear off Banjo's transformations without having to return back to Mumbo or Humba in both Banjo-Kazooie or Tooie would also be nice. So you can just like hold like the R trigger and press a certain button for Banjo to revert back to his normal self. It could even have like a little message confirmation saying, are you sure you want to turn off the spell or something, so that way players don't accidentally turn it off without realizing it. So I would add multiple warp points to Cloud Cuckoo Land because the travel across that level is ridiculous. Speaking of which, let's talk about the worst challenging character in this game, Canary Mary. To this day, I still have not gotten the last Cheeto page because I cannot beat her in that last rematch race. She is such a broken character. It's ridiculous how much she slingshots. I do all the tips that I was advised. I'm aware that the key is that you gotta keep at an even pace with her until the final stretch where you really got button mashed to beat her to the finish. But no matter how close I get, no matter how far I get to the finish line, no matter how fast I button mash, she always beats me no matter what. And I've given up on it. I have such haunting memories of how busted up my thumb felt because of that, and I do not want to go through it again. So I'd rehaul the gameplay of this entire segment. So instead of a button masher, I'd revise the controls of where we accelerate by holding the A button, and we steer to fly through checkpoint rings. Now, I absolutely hate ring flying challenges in video games or races where you have to go through checkpoints in order to win, but I'll gladly take that over a rigged button mashing nightmare. As for the minecart challenge at Glitter Gulch Mine, I don't know. I mean, it never really bugged me to begin with. I mean, it is a button masher, but it didn't feel as strict as the Cloud Cuckoo Land one. I'd maybe revise the controls to instead of being mashing the A button, I'd have it where you have to alternate between the R and L trigger buttons to kind of have it mimic more of the feeling of actually operating a hand cart, you know? Also, I think they should make the speed necessary to press the buttons less demanding and easier to get through, so you're not having to bash it as fast as you can, just fast enough to where you can get the job done, maybe. So it still rewards players for putting effort into it, but it doesn't punish them for not being fast enough. Yeah, that was a common issue with so many N64 and some GameCube games. The button mashing requirements were ridiculous. They expected you to be like a super fast human computer to be able to input that, and sometimes it's just too impossible for some human thumbs to comprehend. So otherwise, that's about all the changes I would make for Banjo-Tooie. Now onto KaTooie mode. What would be the ultimate reward for gamers who beat both of the remakes of the first two games? Combining the save states of our completed Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie playthroughs, we get a new game that combines the worlds of both games to be interchangeable, and it even has a new story with new missions to go through. As I've stated before, Grunty's sisters are the main villains as they want revenge on Grunty, Banjo, and Kazooie. So upon locking Grunty in a jar and locking her inside of the lab atop her old tower, the Witchley duo cast a storm spell over Spiral Mountain, causing it to rain and lightning throughout. Bruntilda sneaks out of the old lair to inform Banjo and Kazooie of the return of Grunty's sisters. As this happens, Minjella swoops down on a broom and kidnaps Bottles and Jam Jars for helping Banjo in the previous game, along with Tootie, while Blobelda kidnaps Klungo for betraying them. The two witches also once again abduct all the Jinjos, the Jinjonator, and Jiggies, and scatter them across the worlds. Banjo and Kazooie head back to Grunty's lair, but find the entrance is blocked off with rocks, so the characters have to use their abilities from the past two games to destroy all these rocks, whether it's the Beak Barrage, the Drill Peck, or Grenade Eggs. So one thing that always bugged me about Banjo-Tooie was how after making it to the final level, Bottles' house is sealed off and there's no way to revisit it, and that sucks if you manage to, for first-time players who never managed to talk to one of Bottles' sons where they can get the zoom ability, where they can zoom in on their first-person camera angles. And so you can no longer get that if you manage to make it to the final level without collecting that to begin with. And yeah, that means you're forced to start the whole game over if you want to get that ability. And so, in KaTooie, however, I think revisiting Bottles' house after he and Jam Jars get kidnapped could include a hidden move that Kazooie can learn. So upon approaching Mrs. Boggy and informing her about her husband's abduction, she'll mention a move that Bottles forgot to teach Banjo and Kazooie about. The move is called the Far Flap, where pressing the L trigger causes Kazooie to quickly and powerfully spread and flap her wings for a burst of air. This can be used on the ground for a sudden burst of speed, along with being useful for dodging attacks, but it can also be used mid-jump as an air dash. Great for not only dodging in the air, but for getting a further reach in platforming. This can even be used underwater for faster swimming, along with mid-flight. I also have two new egg ideas for Kazooie to use. The first one being Zap Eggs. Similar to the battery eggs from Grunty's Revenge, these yellow eggs create bursts of electricity, useful for stunning enemies and charging up worn-out equipment. The second egg is the Bubble Egg, egg-shaped bubbles that unleash a huge splash of water upon popping, useful for soaking up fires and hydrating dried-up plants. The Bubble Eggs could be hidden somewhere in Gobi's Valley, while the Zap Eggs could be hidden somewhere in Mad Monster Mansion. Another new ability could allow us to charge our egg shots by holding down the R trigger a bit before firing the eggs. This will cost double the amount of egg ammunition, but it unleashes a more powerful attack. The Big Blue Egg, for example, could cause a big slow egg to bowl over enemies. A Big Fire Egg could shoot out a big flaming meteor with a fiery explosion. A Big Grenade Egg would shoot scattering explosives. The Ice Egg shoots out a big freezing blizzard, and the Clockwork Kazooie egg creates a giant Clockwork Kazooie with an even bigger explosion. The big Zap Eggs would create a giant discharging blast, and the big Bubble Egg would shoot out a giant bubble that traps enemies and creates an even bigger splash upon popping. Once again, we have to collect Jiggies to re-access levels, which requires us to travel back to Jiggy Wiggy's temple, return the stolen Jiggies, and reopen these levels. Upon revisiting Mumbo's Mountain, not only have the Jinjos been relocated, but the Minjos are also added to the mix. The Jinjos will function more like they did in Tooie, where collecting all members of a Jinjo family rewards you with a Jiggy as they return back home to the Jinjo village. However, I think instead of spreading all the colors across different levels, I think it would make more sense to have all colored Jinjos be assigned to just one level in particular. This time, though, there will be the inclusion of the revived gray Jinjos, and I think the gray Jinjos, it's okay to have at least one of them sprinkled across each level, maybe. As mentioned before, revisiting past levels will include new challenges with Jiggies to earn, along with new transformations and boss fights. Some of these challenges could include enemy combat stations, where we're warped to an arena with waves of enemies being sent out. For instance, Mumbo's Mountain, the enemy challenge would include swarms of tickers and grublins coming after you, and It helped to activate third-person shooter mode to help shoot them all out. So inside of the Grunty's lair levels, Mumbo's huts now function more like they did in Banjo-Tooie. So instead of going to Mumbo to transform like you did in the first game, going to Mumbo's hut will allow us to take control of Mumbo to activate more spell pads to trigger new events. Meanwhile, Wumba's Wigwam will be added to the world, and she'll offer old and new transformations per level. So in this level, Mumbo's spell pad could be located inside of Ticker's mount. So Mumbo's spell will create a hole in the ground that allows Banjo-Kazooie to search underground tunnels beneath Mumbo's mountain and explore new areas with new challenges to offer. Humba's improved spell for the termite will allow Termite Banjo to now chew up wood. So the underground tunnel sections could have areas blocked off because of big chunks of wood, and the termite can eat them up with the X button to unveil what the wooden structures are blocking or hiding inside. In the deepest depths of the underground lies a Queen of the Tickers, similar to the Queen Bulborb bosses in the Pikmin sequels. So she's a fat, lazy blob of a bug that rolls around and shoots out baby soldiers that try attacking us, as Banjo-Kazooie have to shoot up all the termites along with the Queen's weak spots until she's defeated. Another idea is a mini-boss rematch against Conga. As a nod to Donkey Kong 64, Conga is now equipped with an orange-launching bazooka, similar to Chunky Kong's pineapple launcher. Conga is now more agile, as he can hop across the top of his tree to surrounding platforms. Sometimes he'll even jump down below and start chasing after Banjo to try punching him. So once again, we activate shooter mode, dodge his attacks, and shoot him till he surrenders and hands over a Jiggy. The levels in Banjo-Kazooie can also add more simple Jiggies to earn that require the abilities learned in Banjo-Tooie, including having to use like the extra eggs, like the fire eggs and ice eggs, along with the split-up mechanics. For instance, originally in Mumbo's Mountain, there were the huts that we had to destroy by ground pounding them. They can all be spruced up to require different solutions to destroy. So one could be burned down with fire eggs, one requires being blown up with grenade eggs, one requires drill pecking onto it. Then there would be like one that is claimed to be impossible to destroy from the outside, but we notice there's a little opening at the bottom, small enough for the Clockwork Kazooie egg to fit through. And so we control a Clockwork Kazooie as it has to go inside and explode on something that triggers a huge explosion. And so, meanwhile, the totem pole character Juju, he could have a revised challenge where each of his totems are now differently colored, and they'll only eat eggs that match the color of their totem pole. So obviously, like a red one can only eat fire eggs, and a blue one can only eat ice eggs, and then a green one can only eat the grenade eggs. A polka dotted one can only eat a Clockwork Kazooie egg, and so on. So onto Treasure Trove Cove. The boss fight there would be Nipper the Hermit Crab, as he gets upgraded by a spell from the Witch Sisters, causing his shell to now be heavily armored and armed with weapons, like machine guns and missile launchers. His shell also has mechanical legs that allow him to scuttle across the beach and through the waters, so we have to dodge his attacks and use our eggs to dismantle his legs and weapons until his face is exposed and we can attack his eyes. Taking control of Mumbo, his spell pad could be located by Captain Blubber's ship, as Mumbo uses his levitation spell to lift the ship and rise it back into the ocean. And so there could be some Jiggies you can unlock once the boat is out on sail. Upon removing the ship back into the water, underneath where it originally was, you'll find a new underwater entrance that leads to a new area to explore. It will lead to a hidden pirate's cave where we find Captain Blackeye and his crew. And they'll have new missions for us involving a big treasure hunting mission that requires us to travel across different levels, not only across Grunty's lair, but even some that take us back to the Isle of Hags levels. So some of these locations could have us going to places like Gobi's Valley and Jolly Roger's Lagoon for more clues. There could be an enemy wave challenge where we have to fight off the crab and clam enemies. And so Humba gives us a new transformation that turns us into a crab. And the crab can use its pincers to cut open vines that are blocking off areas, or we can use them to cut vines or ropes that are tying up captives or other objects. Clanker's Cavern will have a boss fight inside of him where there's a parasite monster making him sick, and we have to fight it off in order to save Clanker. Mumbo will cast a spell to allow Banjo and Kazooie to breathe underwater again, just like in Jolly Roger's Lagoon. Humba's transformation turns Banjo into a, how do you pronounce this, a plecostomus fish? You know, like one of those little fish that you find in aquariums where they suck on the glass to keep the tank clean. So, with this new form, Banjo's tasked to swim around inside and out of Clanker to eat the filth off of him, because the Witch Sisters managed to pollute Clanker, and so it's up to Banjo to try to give him a cleaning. Bubblegloop Swamp's boss fight will have the witch cast a spell on Mr. Vile that causes him to grow gigantic, and we have to fight him off by taking control of Mumbo. There's a new spell pad on top of Tank Tup the Turtle, and using it will cause Mumbo to use a spell that allows us to take control of Tank Tup in what feels like a kaiju monster fight. As we see in opening, we have to press the X button for Tank Tup to slowly slap his flippers at Mr. Vile, and we have to use the RT button to tuck into our shells to protect ourselves from his attacks. There will also be some new underwater sections in this level, but Banjo-Kazooie can't enter them due to the piranhas swarming the swamp. So, Humbo's improved spell of the crocodile transformation will allow the little crocodile to now be able to swim underwater. There will be a side mission where Tip Tup lost his son and his choir, and they're hiding in the underwater sections, and we need to find them with the crocodile transformation as we swim through the new underwater sections to find the missing turtles. In Freezeezy Peak, the boss fight is an even bigger Mr. Slushy villain parked right on top of the giant snowman. He appears after defeating all the other little Mr. Slushies throughout the level. This time, instead of using only the beak bomb attack to destroy Mr. Slushy, now we can actually melt him by using the fire eggs, or we can use the grenade eggs to shoot the hats off of them, causing them to be destroyed. So the big Mr. Slushy can actually dive into the snow and slide around, appearing and disappearing throughout the fight, and we have to dodge his snowball attacks. We must fire grenade eggs and knock his hat off. As he crouches over to pick it back up, we need to quickly get behind him and blast his butt with fire eggs until he melts and is defeated. So Mumbo can use a spell inside of Waz's cave to uncover a secret passage leading to the icicle grottos of Hailfire Peaks, which would be useful for a mission where Boggy's kids ran away back to Freezeezy Peak, and Banjo needs to round up the kids and send them back to their new home in Hailfire Peaks' ice side. In Gobi's Valley, Mumbo can use a spell inside of the Sphinx, unveiling a giant underground tomb filled with booby traps. Down here, we will learn the new Bubble Egg ability. Deep within the tomb is a giant golem named Gollumer. Gollumer is the boss fight here. Similar to King Cole, we have to dodge his attacks and shoot him until his pieces collapse bit by bit. Except here, he'll have weak points that need to be shot at, and he'll be able to summon the mummy enemies that require gold feathers to defeat. Wumba's transformation will turn Banjo into a snake that can slither through the scorching sands without getting hurt. If you approach Ruby, the snake charmer, we can activate a rhythm minigame, as we have to use the button and analog inputs to match the charmer's song. The snake can also bite enemies and constrict around certain levers and objects to create reactions. In Mad Monster Mansion, Mumbo can use a spell in the church graveyard to open an underground crypt, leading to a creepy dungeon for Banjo and Kazooie to explore. Inside the crypt, we will also find one of Klungo's abandoned labs, where we find the Zap Eggs. Deeper inside the crypt, we find a Frankenstein monster boss fight. He'll come charging at us with super strength, and we have to keep blasting Zap Eggs at him until his power overflows, creating a discharge. As that happens, we then need to fire bubble eggs at him to cause him to short circuit. In Rusty Bucket Bay, Humba will transform Banjo into a hammer who can not only fix broken structures, but can also be used to remove loose nails on certain beaten-up structures to uncover secrets hidden behind them. He can also swing himself sideways and onto the ground to attack enemies, but the hammer cannot swim and will die if he falls into the water. The boss there could be a very different one, as it requires Mumbo to play as. Inside the engine room is a Mumbo pad that Mumbo can use to make a pathway for gears for him to hop across to access new rooms. As Mumbo goes inside, he realizes it's a trap, and he gets ambushed by a revived Minji Jongo. Minji Jongo wants to prove that he is a better shaman than Mumbo, and we have to take control of Mumbo as he has to fight off Minji by dodging his projectile attacks and firing back as well. I don't know, but I think that would be really cool, seeing Mumbo fighting off Minji Jongo, and I think it'd be a really good opportunity to have us control that. Now, the return to Click Clock Wood will be a very different one, so instead of exploring the levels through each season one at a time, what if they divided the level into 4 halves, which each half containing elements of one season, allowing us to explore a mixture of seasonal changes in one level? So when first entering the level, the season doors are now gone, but instead there's just one door with a pie chart above it. The pie chart contains the colors green, yellow, orange, and light blue, each color representing spring, summer, fall, and winter in that order. So you can shoot at the pie chart for it to rotate. Depending on what direction the pie chart is located at, it changes the appearance and layout of Click Clock Wood upon entering. So let's say by default, the top color is green, the one on the right is yellow, the one on the bottom is orange, and the one on the left is light blue. So upon entering the door, we'd step into the fall side of Click Clock Wood, with fallen leaves and huge leaf piles, If we look further left, we see the grass looking more dead and dead until the left half is covered entirely with snow and dead plants. And then you look over to the right and you see how the lake is getting more dried up the further down you go, leading to the big flower garden as it's more dry and sunny outside. And meanwhile, on the very north end where Mumbo's hut is, we see that it's springtime. I think this would be a very fun, yet very experimental way of reviving Click Clock Wood. I'd love to see a level that tries mixing all 4 seasonal elements into one level while offering a way to rotate the weathering effects to change the level's layout in order to get certain puzzles and jiggies. Mumbo will be needed to help plants grow across the spring sections and use his powers to help them grow. Humbo Wumbo will be located somewhere up the giant tree and can transform Banjo into a bee transformation. The bee can travel through the summer and fall sections, but however, if he goes anywhere near the winter sections, he will get hurt from frostbite. And so that's like the one limitation there. Bee Banjo cannot go into the winter settings, and if you try going into Wumbo's wigwam during a winter setting, she'll say that she can't transform you because Banjo won't be able to survive it in that form. I have my friend Steph to thank me for this idea. She said she'd love to see a boss fight that requires having to swap between Banjo and Kazooie to defeat the boss. So after activating 4 switches hidden across the level, a new boss will appear at the hub, being a giant fighting robot resembling a tree called the Terminate Tree. The giant tree will stomp around and swing his branches at us, and he'll have a giant bee hive cannon on one of his branches that can shoot bees after us. After hitting its exposed joints with grenade eggs, the tree will be disabled temporarily, allowing Banjo to climb up into the tree as we go inside of it, and we have to try taking it out from the inside and out. So once we're inside the mechanical tree, there will be many splitting pathways requiring Banjo and Kazooie to split up and destroy the robot inside out, occasionally having to rejoin each other to move on further, only to have to keep splitting up over and over. So for instance, one room could be covered with deadly liquids that requires Banjo to have to use his sack hopping ability to safely get across, so Banjo can destroy a weak point on that end. Meanwhile, Kazooie will have to take a different pathway that has a lot of open gaps that she'll have to glide across, along with some tall platforms that requires her spring jump to get up for more weak points to destroy. And meanwhile, like, they'll climb up to higher levels of the tree, and they'll have to keep taking different pathways to get the job done. As Banjo and Kazooie explore more of the complexities of this mad contraption inside and out, the robotic tree will summon more sentries and enemies to try stopping us. So, I always loved boss fights where a character has to climb inside and out of a monster or machine to destroy it, and it would be so cool to see this implemented in a Banjo-Kazooie game, with 2 characters having to work together and even having to split up to get the job done. So once we have enough jiggies, we find ourselves back to the entrance of Grunty's Furnace Fun. However, there won't be a quiz show this time around. But as we make it further down, we do find 2D bottles and jam jars, and we rescue them. However, as Banjo reaches towards the top of Grunty's lair, he finds no one but Grunty's head trapped in a jar. Grunty explains how her sisters betrayed her and mentions how they've escaped back to Cauldron Keep. Grunty wants Banjo and Kazooie to help give her a new body so she can assist them in defeating her sisters, but she reveals that she'll need Klungo's help, as he's being held prisoner in Cauldron Keep. Banjo says that once they rescue Klungo, they'll bring him back to her to help her out. So we adventure back to the Tooie levels, and we find more challenges that require going back and forth between the worlds of Kazooie and Tooie. So once we get enough jiggies, we regain access to Cauldron Keep, which is now treated as a full level with Jinjos and jiggies to collect. Tower of Tragedy won't be available. Instead, it will be moved up closer to the top of the tower. So there still will be a quiz show, and it'll have questions not only regarding Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, but even the new events of Banjo-Kazooie. And for extra torture, they could also throw in questions for Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts, just to tick players off even more. Yeah, I think it would be really cool to see them re-explore Cauldron Keep with more missions and, more to collect instead of it just being served as an entrance to the final battle. I can't really think of, what kind of missions they could make for say, but otherwise the main goal here is that we need to find Klungo and rescue him, and it'll require collecting a certain number of jiggies to open a door to free him. One thing I would love to see in this is that Humba will be able to give us a real final transformation, and as a nostalgic throwback to Grunty's Revenge, she'll turn us into the tank transformation as we blast our way through walls and destroy onslaughts of enemies as we climb up the tower to rescue Klungo and all that. And So as we finally reach the top of the tower, we're greeted with an unpleasant halt as the top of the tower is blocked off, and the toll to get in is all the Stop and Swap items, including the Stop and Swap 2 items. So, with all these items collected, their mystical powers break the witch's spell, as our heroes now are teamed up with a Mecha Grunty to fight off the witch duo. So it pays homage to the first game's final battle, but this time the sisters are riding around on one broom as they take turns driving and firing spells. We dodge their attacks and fire eggs at them until their broom gets destroyed. Occasionally we need to hide behind Grunty as she uses her new mechanical body to block off some of the hard-to-evade attacks. Once again, we have to free the Jinjos who are trapped in stones, and we have to shoot eggs into them to free them, and then some of them will require certain colored eggs to free them with. And so, eventually, we have the two witch sisters defeated. They try firing one last spell at Banjo, but Grunty charges in and bounces the spell right back at them, causing the two to turn into frogs. Banjo and Kazooie celebrate their victory, only for the inevitable to happen. Grunty turns her back on Banjo-Kazooie with her newly weaponized body, and she wants to finish them off. She traps them in a spell and is charging up another spell to finish them off. Meanwhile, we have to take control of Mumbo as he sneaks around to try to unleash the Ginjonator. Grunty will notice him and try attacking him, and so we have to dodge her attacks while firing spells inside of the Ginjonator statue to free him. And so once the Ginjonator is freed, he'll rescue Banjo and Kazooie, as Banjo and Kazooie ride on Ginjonator's back, and we take control of the Ginjonator as we fly around and repeatedly ram into Gruntilda over and over until her robotic body explodes, leaving her as nothing but a skull head again, as Ginjonator kicks her head flying off into orbit. Our heroes return back to Spiral Mountain, as Tootie sets up a huge welcome back party to celebrate Banjo-Kazooie for once again saving the world. And we're greeted with many of the NPCs we've met along the way, joining in on the festivities. Meanwhile, in space, Grunty's head crashes onto the windshield of the aliens from Banjo-Tooie, as Grunty once again vows that she'll get revenge on Banjo somehow. And those are my ideas for remakes of Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, with a new post-game mode that continues the story while merging both games into a nostalgic new adventure. It honestly annoys me when former members of Rare act like no one can make a new Banjo game or remake it. They claim no one would want them, or they say that there's nothing else to take the series in. Hello, I just spent many hours worth of ideas that I came up with for years to say how they could do more with this series, not only in remaking it, but continuing the story a little bit. So I'm sorry that Rare doesn't see the potential they have in Banjo-Kazooie. If they don't think there's anything more that they can offer of Banjo-Kazooie, fine, whatever. But don't prevent other developers from showing you what you've been missing out on. If you ask me, Rare just sounds jealous over the idea of someone improving upon their work and possibly even showing them that they can do it better. I, for one, would love to see this remake sequel hybrid of Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, and I hope many of you who tuned into this video would love to see it happen someday as well. It's been about 23 years since Banjo-Tooie release. That marks 23 years of fans being disappointed and not seeing a proper new game to this franchise. And I think fans of Banjo-Kazooie really deserve a remake or sequel like this. And maybe if a game like this did come out and did very well, maybe it could give us a real Banjo sequel with entirely new levels and more new abilities to learn. Well, that's all I have to show for now. Thank you for watching, see you next time, and have a great day.